Here's homework question 3C on page 380. So this was lesson 2 on simplifying rationals. We need to factor out the numerator and the denominator. From the numerator, the first thing that we would factor is we'd factor by GCF, and the GCF of the numerator would be 4. So if you factor out a 4, what you would get is 1 minus x squared. In the denominator, we would also factor that by GCF. And the GCF from an 8x cubed, an 8x squared, and a 16x would be an 8x. So take each of these 3 terms here and divide it by an 8x. The 8x goes in front of your bracket, and the answer goes in the bracket. And that answer would be x squared plus x minus 16. Okay, the first thing I'm going to simplify over here is 4 divided by 8. So 4 divided by 8, hopefully you don't need to type that in onto your calculator, but 4 divided by 8 is the same thing as 1 over 2. And I will write that, so 1 over 2. In my numerator, I had, and actually I'm going to bring down this x right now. In my numerator, I have 1 minus x squared. This you just need to recognize is a difference of squares. 2 terms separated by a minus, both the 1 and the x squared could be square rooted. So if I square root both of these and factor this by a difference of squares, that answer would be the square root of 1 is 1, the square root of x squared is x. One factor gets a positive and one factor gets a negative. Okay, then in the denominator, so I've already reduced this 4 over 8x to be 1 over 2x. This becomes a PSA 2, except I could see I made a mistake. It would not be a 16 here. Negative 16 divided by 8x would be negative 2. So factoring this by PSA 1, I'd be looking for what gives me a product, negative 2, the sum of 1, and the answer would be 2 and negative 1. Those are the 2 numbers that would multiply to be negative 2, and if you add these 2 numbers, would get 1. So then this trinomial factored would become x plus 2 and x minus 1. Okay, so now you would see, can I cancel anything? Because everything is factored. And actually, before we cancel, what I should do is I should state my non-permissible values, because once my answer is in factored form, I could look at the denominator to get what x cannot be equal to. So right here, my non-permissible value is 0. X cannot be 0 because that would make the entire denominator 0, which we can't have. From this factor here, x cannot be equal to negative 2. And from this factor here, x cannot be equal to 1. Okay, then we see what we could cancel, and nothing could be canceled. But what I need you to realize is that these factors are written with the x first and the constant last. If you look at the numerator, though, it's the opposite. The constant is written first and the variable is written second. So what I want you to do is rewrite each of these factors. Always write your factors to have the variable written first. If I was to rewrite that with the variable first, I would have this 1 plus x becomes x plus 1. And this becomes negative x plus 1. All over 2x, x plus 2, x minus 1. Nothing could still be canceled, right? Because I've got an x minus 1 down here, but I don't yet have an x minus 1 in my numerator. So the second thing you sort of have to just clue in as is all of these start with my variable being positive, except for this guy here. If ever you have a factor with a negative x, what I want you to do is write that factor off to the side. So this is negative x plus 1. Put your negative 1 there, so that's really a negative 1. And what you could always factor out if you start with a negative is factor out. And when you factor -1, this becomes x minus 1. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to rewrite this again, and this becomes negative x minus 1. So negative x minus 1, write that factor, which is x plus 1. Write your denominator, 2x, x plus 2, and x minus 1. Now check what cancels. X minus 1 over x minus 1 will cancel. And what we're left with at this stage here is negative, and then x plus 1, all over 2x and x plus 2. I would accept this on an exam as a completely simplified answer. Your book, they sort of, what they do in the book is they give your answer to be slightly different. They say, okay, well, this is really a -1, and they distribute that -1 back in at the end. I would actually prefer the way I wrote it because that's fully factored, and they're putting that -1 back in. So your book, what they do for this question is they just, again, at the very end, they say, let's put that -1 back in to give us negative x minus 1, because they know that everything's fully simplified, all over 2x, x plus 2. And then they state the restrictions. X cannot be equal to 0, -2, and 1. So this is how your book answers it, redistributing back in that -1. I actually think this is the more simplified answer because this numerator is then completely factored.